Hello, Thrive Nation. I hope you thrivers are thriving out there. I've got an incredible expert on our hands. He's been just an SA legend. He's just got an international following. People know him all over the world. He's a South African that I'm really proud of. And he's a man who speaks about stress resilience. He's written two incredible books called The Stress Code and Stressproof. And so it's a privilege and honor to have him on the Made to Thrive show. Welcome to the show, Richard Sutton.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that introduction. And when you mention legend, I have to say that you fall into that category. I've been following your career for many years, and you're always up there at the forefront. And so I'm very grateful to be on the show, and thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Well, I want you to tell us a little bit about your backstory, how you got into stress resilience, and you're a health performance educator and consultant. You've worked with incredible companies. Your website is fantastic in terms of just your cred out there. Tell us why stress?
So it's a good question, and I think that you choose your path based on your experiences. So stress was always something that was part of my life. I grew up in a very stressful environment, and I didn't have the skills and coping mechanisms. But then I moved into my passion, and my passion was developing athletes and their ability in all domains. And what I found in that world was that you've got a group of individuals that are subjected to stresses that I don't think we really fully understand: the loneliness, the isolation, the financial pressures, the failures, the setbacks, the constant injuries, the constant fatigue. That is the reality of professional sports. On top of it, very few make a proper living. And what I did notice is that this set of individuals have this incredible capacity to adapt successfully, cope with their stress. And when you look at the research, it was a great Spanish study, a meta-analysis, 10 studies in the meta-analysis, 42,000 people, if I remember correctly. And they were looking at the health span and they're looking at lifespan of professional athletes. And what they found was that on the most part, the vast majority of athletes are free of cardiovascular disease, free of, or on the most part, have a low prevalence of cancers and live on average about 6 years longer. So what we have here is an incredible template for how we can manage our lives better. But I didn't really fully understand what it was. And I thought it was exercise and lifestyle. I thought it was all those behaviors that were helping them navigate the space and creating this resilience prototype of sorts. And what I began to discover through literature, through research, and through experience was it wasn't necessarily this concept of just exercise a little bit harder, just eat a little bit better, just control your environments a little bit better. It was much bigger than that. They were very strategic when they were managing their environments and their circumstances. There was a mindset that accompanied that environment. They also had this incredible ability to change the behaviors under difficult situations and conditions, connect more. They also had the power of shutting down the stress axis. They knew how to turn it off at will. And then they saw the value of all these lifestyle behaviors and built resilience on top of it. So that was really kind of this eye opener. But as I kind of migrated out of the athletic world and into the corporate space, the theme, and this started in 2008 with the Great Recession, was what do we do for the stress in our teams, within our organizations, and for ourselves? And it just grew and expanded, and eventually that was the genesis of my first book, The Stress Code, and it progressed from there.
Sounds incredible, and you really delve deep into the science, which I really like. At the same time, you've incorporated a lot of ancestral sort of principles and wisdom. So you've taken both sides, almost balancing the parasympathetic nervous system with the sympathetic nervous system. You've taken a very stratosphere view on stress. What led you to write the book, The Stress Code, though?
So the Stress Code, it was, I think that I was trying to create an environment or create something that people could use that would be simple, that would be prescriptive in terms of managing their challenges. And it was really the whole motivation was to bring about this construct where the best form of exercise in stressful situations, I could outline that, the best supplementation under those conditions, the best adaptogenic plants that one could take, the best therapeutic behaviors like meditation and yoga, and how to apply it, and what's the science behind it. And really, it was just to provide the public and those individuals who weren't coping very successfully with stress with this manual, so to speak, of self-management, self-engagement under difficult and extreme circumstances.
Cool. What a great book. What a great read. I recommend all our listeners and our viewers on YouTube to get it, start there, and then move on to Stressproof. I haven't finished the read on Stressproof, but just what I've read is just extremely detailed, deep in the science with practical examples, going from things like yoga and looking at the science, but then using ancestral principles like massage and dealing with the vagal nerve and what you can do, visceral manipulation. And so well done to you. If we can sort of just unpack, South Africa is the second most stressed nation in the world, according to Bloomberg. That's on your website. What does that mean for South Africans?
So we've had a challenge past, to say the least, and I think we're still feeling some of those effects, and it's all been amplified by COVID-19 and the challenges that we're experiencing right now. In 2013, Bloomberg did a stress index around the world, and they were looking at trying to rate the most stressed countries in the world using 7 equally weighted measures. I think it was income inequality, corruption perception, homicide rates, pollution, GDP per capita, etc. And when you start looking at this list of objective variables, you see that we'd be pretty low on all of them. And when the index came out, we were ranked number 2 in the world, behind Nigeria on the stress index. And since then, there hasn't been another stress index, so I don't know where we'd be sitting there. But there is a misery index that exists, and the misery index is also a Bloomberg index, as well as a couple of other organizations and companies use a misery index, and it looks at rate of inflation and annual unemployment and puts that as a coefficient and measures that. And as I think we can understand from our socioeconomic position right now, is that we're struggling with unemployment, we're struggling with inflation. I think 4.4% inflation. Official unemployment is 32.7%. It's not really that, that's just the official. But we've been ranking pretty much 2 and 3 for the last 5-6 years, and I don't think it's moving anywhere. So I think the framework and the landscape that we living in and operating in is very, very challenging, to say the least. And then further amplified by COVID-19, which has taken all the existing challenges and just made them so much more magnified.
Sure. And so how important your work is, young Richard Sutton with a huge future ahead of him and the next generation coming. If we are one of the, even if we top 5, how important it is to get these, get awareness first and education, and then second, implementation. And then obviously from thought to action to habit to lifestyle. These are very important strategies that we need to teach our children. I look at just at a 5-year-old, you've got, I think, 3 children, if I'm not mistaken. You've just had a child. How important it is to get these stress coping techniques, and the perception of stress out there is crucial for our well-being and our performance. Isn't that right?
Absolutely, and I think our world has changed so rapidly. If we look at the drivers of stress, and we assume that COVID-19 is the driver of stress, but this whole challenge emerged a long time ago, and we see it's just all a kind of socioeconomic change and the speed of change, and the workplace is changing, our relationships are changing. There's pretty much everything in our lives is recalibrating at a rate that we just not comfortable with. We're not adapting at that same pace, and that lack of control and that uncertainty and the fears that come with it, that really drives the stress. And then we have demands at the same time. There's greater demands and greater expectations on us. We're expected to work longer hours. It's 24/7. Technology has facilitated that. Then what we're seeing is that our whole world's become this world of a lack of support. Some of us have tight family units. We're very fortunate, very blessed to have those family units supporting us. But on the most part, a lot of people are experiencing loneliness. I think in South Africa, 1 in 4, 1 in 3 individuals are really struggling on that front. And we know that's a trigger in depression and anxiety and other mental health issues. So we're seeing this disconnection, a lack of support emotionally, instrumentally. And the list really goes on, and we've got injustice and injustice perception, and all these things are not going away anytime soon. And it really puts a great demand on us as parents. It puts a great demand on leaders and anyone who's instrumentally involved in other people's lives and has an influence over their lives to really ring fence them as much as possible, try and protect them from the stresses that don't have to exist in their lives, and the stresses that are present and we can't change and we can't modify, give them the tools, the resources, and the skills to cope better. And that includes our children, that includes some of our teams and staff members and colleagues.
Well, these two books should be standard reads for schoolgoers. I think grade 8, they should be having these two books just to start getting them to think and understand, because the perception of stress is so important that I want to go into a little bit later. But for the person out there, even the simple question that I ask, and I say to my audience, there's no stupid question at all. What is stress according to Richard Sutton?
So stress, if you look at the most basic definition, stress is an emotional reaction to demanding circumstances. So a disproportionate reaction on the most part to the circumstances that we get confronted with. And I think that we often contextualize stress on this emotional domain, and it's all kind of this: our mood is less stable, our reactions to our environment become more volatile. But in reality, stress is bigger than that. There's a physical response, there's a psychological and cognitive response, and there's emotional response. But essentially, it's an emotional reaction to demanding circumstances. Whether you look at the Oxford English Dictionary and how it expounds on that is the simplest form of defining it.
And where would you start? I mean, I've looked at Kelly McGonigal's work and the upside of stress. I've read the book, and I think it's a fantastic read. And I've got this little 5-year-old on now, and she's just hearing stress, and stress causes this. And 85% of all chronic conditions are related to stress. How should people think about stress, Richard?
So therein lies the problem. And Kelly's work has been instrumental in reshaping our understanding, reframing what the stress is. So we perceive stress to be this negative thing, this condition that is associated with an increased prevalence of mental health issues, physical health issues, cognitive decline, a variety of diseases, accelerated aging. And in many instances, that is right, but it's only under a certain set of conditions, and that those conditions are chronic exposure to stress, where we are pretty much holding now after the COVID-19 kind of phenomenon that entered our world. But short-term stress is highly advantageous, highly beneficial. If you look at all the successes in your life and all the times you move forward emotionally, you move forward on every single level in your life, there has been some stress associated with it. And if we remove stress from our lives, we literally become stagnant. And what gives us meaning and purpose in life is moving forward. And stress is actually that vehicle. So when we initially get stressed, what we have is the surge of adrenaline and noradrenaline, or epinephrine and norepinephrine, to the extent about 500% raised levels of these wow. chemicals, these neurotransmitters. So that's quite significant. And that happens instantaneously before we see the threat, just almost the perception of an environmental change. But then what we have is around 15 minutes, cortisol starts kicking in, the HPA axis, and what we see is the shift that lasts for about 80 minutes in response to that event. And that event is basically destabilization of our current reality, something that we're not comfortable with, something that's going to force us to move and adapt and change. Now, the thing is, when you look at this collective set, this powerful collective set of raised cortisol, raised norepinephrine, raised epinephrine, we see this massive change in our cognitive ability. We become much clearer, much more energetic, much sharper, much stronger, much more powerful. We become much more motivated. In many respects, stress gives us superpowers. Our eyesight is better, our taste, our smell, everything becomes heightened. And this is there to ensure our survival, our successful adaptation to the pending event. And this is why we're here today, because of the stress axis. The challenge doesn't lie with the stress axis, and this is what we're all led to believe. Every time you get stressed, a disaster, try and mitigate it. If we don't get stressed, we don't move forward. We don't grow. We don't develop. If we don't get stressed, we literally stagnate. Another interesting thing that happens with stress is the activation or increased activity of a certain protein, an HTR2A receptor, which is a serotonin receptor. So there's increased excitation of this receptor. This receptor is largely responsible for driving serotonin, or serotonin's response on our nerve cells. And it really promotes cognition and clarity and neuroplasticity and adaptability, basically giving us the tools to reshape our brain, reshape our reality in response to this threat, the biggest gift out there. But whether stress becomes destructive or not depends on whether you can control it and whether you embrace it or not. And the best example of this was a study, I think was published by a team at the University of Wisconsin, and it involved around 30,000 people over a period of 8 years, looking at it, the perception of stress. I think Kelly cites this in some of her talks and in her book. I haven't read a book, but I know in some of her talks. And basically what they were looking at is the perception of stress and how it manifests in your reality. So 8,000 people, 30-year period of time, don't know how they got the funding and the resources to do this, but incredible effort to the team. And what they were looking at is people's experience of stress and whether they had a positive mindset, saying that stress is okay, it's going to move me, it's going to adapt me, and I'll get over it, I'm not going to get sick from it, just kind of get on with life. And a negative mindset saying stress is the enemy, stress is so destructive, my world's going to come to an end, I'm going to fall apart. That is the narrative in terms of stress. And what they wanted to see what happened in terms of chronic disease manifestation or risk of premature mortality in that 8-year period of time. And what they discovered was that those individuals who had a negative perception of stress and experienced stressful events, and on average, we experience around 4 to 5 stressful events a week prior to COVID, those individuals had a 43% higher risk of premature mortality from all causes.
Wow.
But when they looked at those individuals who experienced stress, same amount of stress, but had a positive mindset, saying, stress is a vehicle, it will move me, it will change my reality, it's okay, it's not the end of the world, we'll get over it. Resilient individuals, their increased risk of mortality was 3.5%.
Sure.
And that is the power of the mind.
Wow.
So what invariably happened was a series of research papers. A lot of them emanated from Harvard. Jeremy Jamison was one of the lead researchers looking at reframing. If you see stress as an advantage in your life, as an opportunity, everything from a biological standpoint is happening for opportunity, for the recreation of new realities, for a better version of self. Now, if you actually believe that, what happens to you? And they're looking at cardiovascular parameters, they're looking at blood vessel dilation, blood pressure. They're also looking at immune system activation. They're looking at alpha amylase, at neurochemical status. And what they found in a series of studies, I'm just reviewing 3 studies here, in a series of studies in different contexts with people who suffered from anxiety disorders as well, was that if you reframe stress and get exposed to stress, a lot of the negative effects of stress do not materialize. Plus, you're sharper and more clear and more cognitively capable and more agile, etc. And that is the power of the mind. And that's where we have to start. We have to reshape this narrative. But that is on condition that we do one thing, and that is we control the stress axes. Because now what's happening, as opposed to our ancestral past, where stress was very sporadic, so it was intense and it was a short periods of time, and we had groups to support us. Now it's chronic. It's like you turn it on in the morning and it just stays on just repeatedly, and it never goes off, and day and night, a week and a week. What we have to do now is have the discipline to shut it down, and that is that next step, and that is how we really gain mastery over this whole phenomenon that we're confronted with.
Sure, fantastic summary there, Richard. There's so many questions I've got for you in that, but it reminds me of Nassim Taleb's, book Anti-Fragile, that actually when stress comes, we're more than resilient, we actually get stronger. And I've forgotten the name of the guy's book who wrote Post-Traumatic Growth. Moving from post-traumatic stress disorder, can we now reframe people's thinking and the way they see it from PTSD to post-traumatic growth? How would you put that in context of where we are in South Africa? Can people who are listening to this or watching this saying, you guys are crazy, my doctor says that 90% of all, stress, and they just label the word stress, or maybe we need a new nomenclature in terms of what's causing. Is it long stress? Is it, not putting these boundaries in place, like you've said? How do people become anti-fragile or stress resilient in terms of, yes, they started with the thought process, but then how do they put those boundaries in place, and how should they see it?
So that's a complex question, and there's not going to be a simple answer. It's not reframe and your reality is different. If we are going to change this narrative, and we all have this responsibility, our life is not going to change. The circumstances are not going to change. We can't control what we're experiencing externally. And what we can't control is the social, economic changes. We can't control the environmental shifts and changes, more pollution. We can't control the foods we're eating in many respects, to the chemicals that they're grown with, and the whole delivery process from the point which they're grown and to the point we ingest them. There's so many things that cause stress in the body, not just the emotional side. So what we have to do is we have to start looking at this, not tactically saying that I'm stressed, therefore I need to behave in this way, but rather strategically saying that these are the new circumstances. Guys, not going to change. This is the new reality. I'm going to have to change. I'm going to have to adapt.
Wow.
And if I don't adapt, I'm not going to be successful. and my family's not going to be successful. My business is not going to be successful. And that is the fundamental prevalence. That's a fundamental premise of resilience is this adaptability. But in order to create the stress model, the successful stress strategy, there's 4 fundamental parts. And I've mentioned it very briefly in the introduction. The first part is get your mindset, change your mindset. And it's not something that happens overnight. You're not going to be able to say, oh, today I see stress as a positive, therefore it is a positive. It's not going to change. Yeah. You have to wake up every day and say that stress is a vehicle for growth, stress is a vehicle for opportunity. I'm going to see it in a different context. When a stress comes at me, I'm going to realize that I am stronger, I am more capable, I'm biologically primed for success. And you have to remind yourself, and you've got to do it repeatedly. So that is one of those behaviors that has to be entrenched into our psyche, where the habit becomes the new reality. Whether you believe it in the beginning or don't, it's irrelevant. It eventually will imprint itself in our psyche. The second part is to do the opposite of what we're doing right now. So if you look in our ancestral past, or look back in our ancestral past, every time that we're confronted with a famine or a war or a conflict or a pandemic of whatever sort it was, and we've been through some major challenges as humanity, and we've come through all of them. What did we do? How did we overcome those challenges of the past, either in small groups or as countries? And if you look back, you see one thing was consistent. It was connectivity. We are very strong as a unit. We're very strong as a collective, but we're very weak in isolation. So I think there was a great anthropologist who was discussing like just the different concepts of what we did and what we did right to get to this point in human history. And he said that we fundamentally did 2 things right. We protected our group and we shared. And that is an amazing idea to take into this time. Is what we tend to do is when we get stressed and we feel overwhelmed, we tend to hug the corners. We tend to get very close to the wall. We don't want to move outside of our environment. We become very insular. We pretend everything is fine. I mean, go back to last year lockdown and call a friend and everything had changed. Your business is like stopped abruptly and you don't know what the future is going to bring. And a lot of people are experiencing COVID and severe symptoms, and you've lost friends and you've lost family members, and it's just this absolutely chaotic state. And you ask someone how they do it, perfect, never been better. This is what's expected of many people. And the reality is that if we want to be stronger in these situations, if we want to be more resilient and more successful with the changes that we're currently experiencing that are impending, that we're going to have to do things differently. And that is to fight our nature. And our nature is largely built on what society has driven us to do. Society has zero tolerance for weakness. We only have like reverence for those who are successful. So if you're not projecting strength and you're not projecting wealth and business success and good looks, and then society doesn't want to know you. But the reality is that's completely dysfunctional. And in these times, this is where Brené Brown has been so brilliant, is just saying that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to show these experiences that you are real and people do connect to you more sincerely. So the thing is with stress is that behavioral part. If we shift our behavior, we change our reality as well. And our behavior has to move not in the direction of just expressing vulnerability and that's the end of it. I'm struggling and that's the end of it. We have to really connect to people when we are feeling low and when we are feeling fearful and when we feel disconnected and isolated from the world. And what that does, this connection and this building of relationships in that time, is it changes certain physiological states that we experience. So what we have is the septal region of the brain activates, which overrides the fear sensor, which is the amygdala. We also see the vagus nerve, which shuts down the stress axis, also engage in response to connection with other people. So showing them empathy and support and care and charity and showing your vulnerability just really starts driving these mechanisms that start down regulating the stress response. But the most powerful mechanism or the most powerful influence of connecting with people when we feel vulnerable and becoming part of the group again is the release of oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is a neuropeptide. Its fundamental role is to mitigate a lot of the chaos that is caused by the stress hormones within our psyche and within our behavioral state. It's the calming agent. Oxytocin has an inhibitory effect on the fear center, the amygdala. So the minute oxytocin surges through your brain, all of a sudden the fear center shuts down, period, gone, done. But oxytocin can also redirect our behaviors. So excessive cortisol in the system can lend itself to anxiety and fears and insecurity and lack of self-worth and depression. That is the marker or the psychological marker of cortisol. But oxytocin, which gets released in stress, but specifically when we connect to others in a stressful situation, oxytocin has a very different psychological profile: self-worth, trust, empathy, self-belief, fearlessness, optimism, basically totally antagonistic psychologically and behaviorally from the stress hormones in a prolonged state. Now, that's just the beginning of this story. What oxytocin is also able to do is shift us biologically. So it has anti-inflammatory effects. It has antioxidant effects. So a lot of the negative or adverse effects of stress, the immune system goes mad. We also have increased oxidation. But now you've got this molecule, this neuropeptide that will get stuck into the body. Also lowers cortisol. It does a whole bunch of things. And the minute we connect to people, we start releasing this hormone. And we see it all the time. When I worked in professional sports for 2 decades. And when I started my career, I always believed that the team with the strongest players is the team that's going to be most successful, and you want to align yourself to that team. And as I developed my career, I realized not at all the case. It's the team that's the most connected, the team that's the most united, the team that's the most authentic, the team that's the most sincere, that will always shoot the lights. And we saw that with the Springbok World Cup winning team. Their connection, their unity, they're playing for each other. And that connectivity is driving this fearlessness and this confidence, self-worth. And that is that oxytocin element. And this is part 2 of this model.
So you got mindset, and then I just want to stop you there. The second over here is community and connection, and really feeling safe in that environment, that you can be vulnerable, that you can reach out, and that there are people there that have got your back, that celebrate who you are. Because it seems like people are reaching out these days, and then they're not accepted because they're not performing well. So then they stop reaching out. They stop being vulnerable. You know, true friendships are on the decrease. The University of Chicago, it made me think, they've done a long-term study, and John Levy, this incredible individual, he's a behavioral scientist. You'll love his work. He wrote a book, You're Invited. But he showed that this long-term study, since 1985, Americans had 3 close friends. By 2004, they had 2 close friends. That's before social media. Now, even call it 17 years later, how many close friends do we have because of globalization, which he thinks is the most, prolific sort of factor there? But how many close friends do we know have got our back, that we can call in the middle of the night again and again and say, I'm struggling, I'm battling, can you help me? Without judgment, without sort of this view that if you don't perform and you don't look a certain way, then I'm not going to be connected to you. You're not going to be part of my tribe or my community. So this connection is so important. But because we're isolating ourselves more, what's happened to people reaching out and stimulating oxytocin, which you've given the most incredible summary about? Oxytocin is probably on the decrease compared to how it was maybe 20, 30 years ago.
Absolutely. And it's very difficult to just say, kind of, you struggling, reach out and share your experiences and expect a warm response. A lot of people have to be almost re-educated in their relationship, saying that, this is how we do it. This is when I'm in crisis, this is how I show support. And it really starts with us. And whether we're feeling low, whether we're feeling strong, if we can show more support, if we can show more care, more empathy, more compassion, be more understanding in difficult situations, it becomes infectious. It becomes the pattern of the relationship. And that is ultimately going to manifest in this new reality. But we have to kind of stop. The buck has to stop with us, and we have to recreate or basically go back to how we used to be in strong units that are facing the world, that are confronting anything, and are very difficult to overpower. And that's where we have to step back to.
It reminds me of in lockdown, I used to just, there were 4 of us in the house, myself and my 2 kids, and we used to just embrace and hug and touch and hold hands and try and release this oxytocin. And any one of my close family or friends that was willing to do that, obviously respecting where they're at. But how important is that physical touch from a sensory point of view to release that oxytocin and get that contact that's always been around? If you think of the rugby guys, we won the World Cup, it's embracing, it's holding, it's touching, it's hitting each other. There's there's something in the physical touch. Maybe you want to just expand on that, Richard.
Very much so. So one of the other drivers of oxytocin release is physical contact. And we have receptors mostly on the front of our body that when there's light, sensitive contact, especially with others, we engage those receptors, and those receptors are able to result in a release of oxytocin. And what we need to do is we need to create these pressure contacts, or these contacts can be even eye contact in many respects, for periods of 20 seconds or longer, just that's from a biological standpoint. And in order to reshape and really have this recalibration of biological set, we're looking at about 8 contacts a day in order to create this new biological reality. So if we show more empathy, more care, more support, more compassion, more charity, having more context with those in your inner circle that you know, not exposing yourself to any risk, all of a sudden we can reshape our reality just off the back of this powerful molecule. But just staying on oxytocin, if you also want to elevate oxytocin, high dose vitamin C, high dose magnesium, and magnesium L-threonate specifically, is very powerful. Loving kindness meditation, something that's really starting to stick out for me at the moment, this concept of loving kindness. I'll just expound on that a little bit. So loving kindness meditation typically involves self-dialogue. It starts with self-dialogue. May I be happy and healthy and successful and well, whatever you wish for yourself. And so many of us are so hard on ourselves right now. We self-flagellating. We're not performing as well as we did. Our confidence is a little bit low, and we push and come on, you can do it. And self-talk and dialogue and get up and kind of whipping a tired donkey is the best way to explain it. But this is a time where we also need to self-soothe and self-nurture, and it's a great way to start. So you get in a chair, you get on your bed, and you just start, you know, it's great to have a guided version, but may I be happy, healthy, successful, well, whatever it is. And you just go and you go, and then you move to someone very close to you. So someone who, like your wife or your kids, and may they be successful and healthy and happy and whatever you wish for them, 4 things. And you just repeat. Then you move one step away to a friend of yours, not that close, but you really get on well with them. May they be whatever they want in their life, 4 things. And you wish them and you wish them and you wish them. And then what you do is you go to someone, you don't have a great relationship with them, not the best relationship. So I think most people today are too tired to actually have grudges. I think we've got too much on the go. I've asked a lot of people, you know, someone you don't like. No, I don't dislike anyone. Most people don't dislike anyone. They just don't have time for those individuals. So they irritate them. They have this dynamic that doesn't go well between the two of them. But I wouldn't say, I'd say hate or true dislike is a strong word. But someone that you don't really get on well with, and you wish them 4 things that are important to them, not important to you. And then lastly, you go for community. May my community be safe and healthy and happy and thrive. And the most amazing thing is this is a major oxytocin trigger. So what the thoughts and these patterns in the mind are stimulating these biological responses that almost could be real. So sometimes, you know, if you don't have the option of physical contact, loving kindness meditation, magnesium, vitamin C, and also pro-social acts could be that mitigating force.
Jeez, incredible. What a summary on oxytocin. We got to get that out there. And, you know, as you were speaking, Richard, I just thought, I've just interviewed Mick Mann from Singularity University, and your work and just your knowledge needs to get out there more to educate and empower the next generation, the current generation. Obviously, the older generation, you've got a difficult sort of entrenched view on it. Is so difficult to change those neural pathways, but always possible. But just to get out there and start educating more and more, and how you've spoken just now about, we're only on the second point of the mindset and community. But getting an online course out there, you know, I just think it's so important, and I just encourage you to just expand this to such a degree, because I think it's invaluable. And I'm actually quite emotional, because if our children can start with these things, I think I've always had a narrative that stress was bad, and if we can change it, if you can change it, if I can support you in that, I think it's fundamental. And so I want to again, kudos to you. Let's get on to number 3.
So number 3, I think is one of the most weighted of the points, and that is control. Control of the stress axes. And this is what defines good stress versus bad stress, is time. Simply put, if you can turn stress off when you don't need it, not externally, those are not going to change, those events, those circumstances. But if you can turn off the biological states when and how you want to, whenever you want to, that creates a new biological reality and a new reality ultimately. So you're gaining all the value and the benefit of stress, but you're not having that corruption in system and the destruction and down regulation of systems that just cannot stay at this elevated level for a protracted period of time. Now, what was very interesting is that many years ago, a team in the UK, a major series of studies, involved 28,000 people over 40 years, looking at what causes stress, period. Wanted to know what causes stress, and does it really impact us? And what they found conclusively is, for the first time in history, stress does have a very adverse effect on our health if it's in a chronic state. And we know that that's understood. We know that from experience. It's not something science need to tell us. But what they were really trying to do is uncover why. Why is it we feel, what is this thing that is stress, and why is it so prevalent now? And it wasn't so much of an issue a while back in the 50s and the 40s and the 30s, when we're going through some major things from a social and humanitarian perspective. So what the team basically unpacked was that fundamentally, the younger you are, the more stressed you're likely to be for a number of different reasons. And those reasons really stems from the sense of no control. So what they identified was that the primary driver in stress in our lives is a feeling that we're out of control, period. Lack of control. And lack of control creates uncertainty and it creates fear. And if you look at the time right now, the times that we're confronted with, nothing is within our control. We don't know what's going to happen next week. We don't know if we're going to be locked into the city. We don't know what's going to happen economically. We don't know what's going to happen with our businesses. We're not going to know what's going to happen with our health. And the sense of a lack of control is the single biggest driver in stress in our lives. At the same time, there was support and injustice and an effort-reward imbalance. But I'm not going to talk about those features because those were second to this lack of control. So if on point 3, which is now gaining control, turning off the stress axis, if we can gain control over our biological state, we can gain control over our lives in many respects. Now, how stress fundamentally operates is off a negative feedback loop. So when our stress hormone levels rise, what we typically see is a region of the brain detect this rising level of stress hormones, hippocampus specifically, and the minute it's detected, it literally says to the body, okay, guys, good, we're good, we're done. Let's knock it out in 80 minutes. We don't want to carry on this state. It's enough. We probably overcome the challenge. And that's exactly what normally happens. So you have this negative feedback loop, raise stress hormones, hits the brain says, enough now, down it goes. In some individuals, myself specifically, and many others, I think about 20, 30% of the population, we have a genetic variant in FKBP5, a protein that can obstruct this negative feedback loop. So you get stressed by something and just keep going and rising and rising and rising because this feedback loop is corrupted. You don't have this efficiency in shutting down the axis. You also have an enlarged amygdala, so your fear response is a little bit greater. And there's a whole set of circumstances that arise, and some people are genetically predisposed to this exaggerated stress state and inability to shut down. And I think a lot of people can relate to what I'm saying. But ingeniously, the body's all about making a plan. It's got a fail-safe. It's got an off button that you can access anytime you want to. All you have to do is consciously do it. And this off button is not a molecule. It's not a hormone. It's actually a nerve system known as the vagus nerve. And the minute we engage the vagus nerve meaningfully and purposefully, we're able to really recalibrate our entire biological state within a period of 30 seconds to a minute. We start shutting down the axis, our immune system starts calming down, and we achieve the state of homeostasis. Now, the vagus nerve is one of those things that's pretty easy to stimulate, very easy to access. In fact, a lot of the ancient wisdoms, our Vedic and Chinese medicine practices were very vagal oriented because the more you can control our biological states and improve heart rate variability, the healthier we'll be, the better we can recover. Our own defenses will be much more prevalent, and we're not relying on external substances to manipulate one system at the expense of others. So the vagus nerve is instrumental in healing and recovery and shutting down the stress. We can engage anytime we want. Now, the activities that do it most successfully include meditation. So now we've got this meditation can drive oxytocin and activate the vagus nerve. Now, scientists were looking at how long does one have to meditate and how successful do you have to be at meditation in order to activate the vagus nerve. Now, I was quite I have to say I was quite dubious. I was quite suspect of the power of meditation, even the power of yoga, going into my research for the stress code. And I wasn't a practitioner myself. I actually, I thought it was a good concept, and if Harvard are embracing it, they're onto something. But I didn't really value it or appreciate it until I finished my book. Then it became a completely different context, and it became a different reality for me altogether. So fundamentally, it was a great paper looking at genetic changes in response to meditation. What they found was that after 12 minutes of meditation, the changes, the shifts are going to be taking place in the immune system. Vagus nerve will be strongly activated, and you're going to be recalibrating your whole biological state. So 12 minutes is pretty easy for most individuals. You don't have to master it. It's all about taking those distracted thoughts and the chaos that's going in your head and trying to filter them into one position or one state, whether it's focusing on breathing or whether it's focusing on a mantra, whatever it is. And it's not about the success of being able to do it brilliantly. It's about trying to do it and keep pulling yourself into the step, pulling yourself. We get better at it. It's like a muscle. You get far more successful at it. But there was a brilliant study, and it was another Harvard study. I think it was over a 12-week period of time, comparing typical stress management techniques, like very basic, just the exercise, a little bit better on the diet, and kind of manage your lifestyle, and compare it to meditation and how people responded to different stresses. And what they found was that the typical stress responses, not the strategy that I'm putting forward today, but the typical stress management responses have very little effect on our stress axis at all. Nothing really happens. So we do. That's what I was mentioning earlier. That it's very tactical. We kind of apply a little bit of this, apply a little bit of that, and nothing really transpires. And then we kind of give up and carry on with our old life. But what they found, the meditation group, their response to stress, the reaction biologically, cognitively, behaviorally, on every level, had shifted in a 12-week period that was almost incomprehensible.
Wow.
But meditation is just one of those elements. Yoga is a very powerful vagal stimulator, and it was a brilliant study. It was an Indian study comparing yoga to antidepressants in terms of managing depression. So what they did was they took a group, I think it was 58 or 50 odd participants in the group, all diagnosed with depression. I think it was unipolar depression. All significant as well to a severe depression, and they looked at if there were biological markers. All of them had raised cortisol to the extent of 30% or higher. They then monitored basically they created 3 groups and monitored them over this period of 3 months. Now, it was a very brave study, because what they were going to do is take 2 groups or 1 group off antidepressants completely. 1 group was purely antidepressants over that period of time. I'm not going to mention the name of the antidepressant, but 12 weeks of antidepressant therapy to assess whether antidepressant therapy was going to help with the depression, and if it was going to make a biological difference. The other group was a combination of yoga, which will stimulate the vagus nerve and shut off stress, and antidepressants. And the last group was the real brave group, randomly assigned, was just yoga. Now, at the end of the study, every single participant's impression scores improved. Depression from a psychological and behavioral perspective had shifted completely in every single member of the group, all 50 participants. But when they looked at those individuals taking the antidepressants and they looked at cortisol, what they found was over this 12-week period of time, cortisol levels had actually risen a little bit. So from a surface perspective or external perspective, things were better, but internally the chaos was there. Nothing had really shifted on a biological level. So a lot of the adverse effects of the stresses and of that emotional state were still entrenching themselves and manifesting. They then looked at the yoga antidepressant group in combination, and what they found was that this particular group, there was no raise in cortisol, but it hadn't dropped either. So it was still a 30% elevation in cortisol on average, but depression symptoms had diminished, and that was it. That was the outcome. And then they looked at the yoga group, who also, their depression scores had significantly diminished. Many of the individuals were experiencing depression following the daily yoga experience and exposure. And what they looked at cortisol, most of their cortisol, the vast majority of the participants in the group, their cortisol had dropped by 20%, meaning it was 10% over baseline at most.
Sure. Wow.
So we have this biological shift and this behavioral and cognitive shift that occurred in response to yoga. And it's not yoga per se. And I certainly wouldn't be experimenting with just yoga, no antidepressants. I mean, that's a very brave position to take, but it does show the power of the vagus nerve on biological regulation. And if we did yoga, same thing here, is about 12 to 15 minutes on a regular basis, or meditation, we're stimulating the vagus nerve. But there's many other activities. Some of the most powerful vagal activators, acupuncture, one of the most powerful means of accessing the vagus nerve. In seconds, 30 seconds, there's major transformations. If you're looking at osteopathy and physical therapy and chiropractic, all have a very positive effect on the vagus nerve. Obviously, there's a dependency. You have to have the session on a regular basis, but with the vagus nerve, that's what it's about. It's about saying that I'm having a tough day. Let me shut down. Let me shut down today. And the more you shut down, the more agile this whole system becomes. And the stress axis fundamentally is about heart rate variability. The stronger you can adjust your system and quicker you can adjust your system, the less stress is going to have an effect on you. And it's all training. The other activities that we intuitively have migrated to is cold immersion, specifically on the face. So the vagus nerve has very strong connections to the trigeminal nerve, the nerve that supplies most of the face. And when we stimulate the trigeminal nerve through cold water immersion or exposure about 10 degrees or less, we have this massive activation of the vagus nerve, and we see heart rate drop, blood pressure come down a little bit, palms will stop sweating, everything will recalibrate in a period of 30 seconds. They actually use cold face immersion to test the strength of the vagus nerve. That is the official test for the vagus nerve. But it's not just cold immersion, it's water immersion as well. And I always wondered what a guy like Lewis Pugh would be doing. Like, why would you do that? Why would you jump into the ocean? It is absolutely freezing. I mean, it's a couple of degrees at most. And you're addicted to it. You can't stop. Now, there's two amazing things that happen with cold immersion. One is the vagus nerve. So you got on the face, cold immersion, vagus nerve, trigeminal nerve stimulated, vagus nerve activated, stress shut down, gone, done. Thanks for coming. You're back to normal. But the other thing that happens with water submersion is the minute your head goes under the water, you activate a primitive reflex known as the dive reflex. Now, the dive reflex is about survival. It's all about our subconscious saying that I don't know if I'm coming up or how long I'm going to be down. Guys, we're going to shut down the team. Everyone, biological, heart down, blood pressure down, glucose down. Everyone, you shutting down whether you like it or not, because I'm submerged. I don't know what's going to happen next. You consciously know you're coming up. But subconsciously, anything could happen, and it's the body's preparing. So within a couple of seconds, you've also recalibrated. And I use swimming a lot in summers as that recalibration. But just a little bit on, cold is, with Wim Hof and Lewis Pugh, cold has become this thing at the moment. And there's so many benefits to it. But the greatest benefit in the stress space of cold exposure, and I'm not talking about health, the sirtuin family being activated and all these like fundamental shifts that take place are so positive in longevity. But I'm talking specifically stress, is that it's an incredible trigger for a molecule known as neuropeptide Y. So neuropeptide Y, its job, it is primary role, it's released to reduce anxiety. And when you get into a cold environment between around 10 and 12 or 10 and 15 degrees centigrade, and you emerge for minutes or longer, neuropeptide Y floods through the brain, and you've got this whole chaotic state and all the worry and all the fears and all the chaos you've created and drama you've created in your own head dissipated. The anti-anxiety molecule has arrived. It's a neuropeptide like oxytocin, and it's this incredible recalibrator. So we've got fundamentally so many options. We've got massage, we've got acupuncture, we've got visceral osteopathy, we've got meditation, we've got yoga, we've got cold submersion, we've got cold face immersion. We've got so many options in which we can activate the vagus nerve and transform our reality at that moment. The trick is to do it, is to have the discipline and say, it's time. And for me, just from a practical perspective, is what I used to, at the end of the day, try and shut down. It was too late by then. I've got this FKBP5 variant, and I just keep revving up the whole day. So what I tend to do now is middle of the day, doesn't matter what's happening, around 12, 1 o'clock, I go shut myself down, and it just recalibrates me. And I'm a vastly different person in response to it. And I use different forms of meditation based on where I'm holding to do that.
Sure. Incredible summary there. So many things that people can actually action, straight away. If they're listening to this podcast, they can action it straight away. Tell us a little about, you sound like a modern biohacker, this cold thermogenesis that you're speaking of, the things that you're doing, like meditation, how important that is, looking at the acupuncture, which I've had a long 22-year history of. I've seen it by empirical evidence. I know the science behind it, how powerful that is. But let's look at self-quantification, because I think heart rate variability is very important as a measure. I'm not saying it's totally accurate, but maybe you can explain in simple words, firstly, what heart rate variability is. And secondly, at Made to Thrive, we've adopted, and you can find heart rate variability in different forms, but this is called the Core Sense, and it links to an app. It's just some biohacking tool where you can do breath work, or you can do meditation. Humming has been shown significantly over long periods, and all these mantras of hum and what the humming does, how important it is. I've seen the heart rate variability change. But tell us a little bit about your biohacking experience. Secondly, heart rate variability, and third, self-quantification. How important is that for people?
So heart rate variability, when I was developing, I developed a genetic panel called DNA Resilience, and it's all about our ability to successfully adapt to changing environments. What drives that on a genetic level? And when I was diving into the research and looking at some of the molecules that can really spike our stress responses, one of those molecules is CRHR1, and the other is FKBP5. I was looking at strategies and ways in which we can govern these molecules very effectively, and so that we don't have these exaggerated responses, and we can be more modulated and moderated under difficult circumstances. And one of the solutions in a lot of the research was developing heart rate variability, this interbeat variance of heart rate. We think that the more consistent your heart rate, the healthier you are, but it's not the case. It's the more variation in your heart rate, the more you've got this beautiful interplay between the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. And that's really a fundamental mark of health. And the strategy for heart rate variability, the strategy for managing a disproportionately reactive stress axis is to develop this. The more you can develop this, the more you can control your reactions to the outside world. Now, a lot of things are able to do this. Exercise is really good. Cold immersion, unbelievably successful. Certain dietary practices, limiting alcohol, breathing, exercise. These are all triggers in developing heart rate variability, which has a very strong link to the vagus nerve as well. It's the vagus nerve and norepinephrine. It's not heart rate variability requires these. There's a beautiful interplay between these two systems. Now, I didn't really understand it until I started measuring it. And that device, there is no question, I would like one of those devices, and I need it as soon as possible.
You can use mine with pleasure. Take it, check out the app, have a look, tell me what you think. It's something we've engaged with Core Sense over time. They're part of one of our partners here through Made to Thrive, but I'd love your perspective on it, because it's something that you can just put off. Obviously there's the Oura Ring, the Garmin does it, but this is something specific. You can wake up, you can do what they call a morning readiness score. I just have found it very, very beneficial, but I love your take on it. Yeah,
so that's my feeling, is that it really has heart monitoring. I've started with the Garmin. I was a little disappointed. Very pro Garmin. I use my Garmin every single day. Moved to the Oura Ring. I didn't know about this device. I'm very excited that there's another mechanism of diagnostics and measurements and tracking and analytics. So very excited to get my hand on another tracking device. But I started looking at heart rate variability, and I started becoming very predictive of what I was capable of doing the next day. So if I had a really tough night, using the Oura Ring as an example, where heart rate variability was about 10 or 15 beats lower than my average, that next day I knew I was in for a tough run. So I'd be engaging more in yoga and more in therapies and more cold immersion, just trying to bring myself into a state of balance. When I had very strong heart rate variability over the course of the night, and it was higher than average, I knew I could just give it, CrossFit. I could kill it. I knew that there's nothing that could stop me that day. And I use it, and it's very, very reliable. It's an incredible tool. Now, I think that those who are not using it are missing out on a huge trick. It's a huge trick in managing stress and managing your own personal performance. We are talking personal performance now. Just to kind of just go back to that topic, we're starting with stress, and I think the first place to start in this environment is manage our stress. We got the strategy, and I'll talk about the fourth part in a bit, but we've got this incredible strategy that we need to employ, and that's one step, but it's not the end of the continuum. It doesn't stop there. Then we have to shift to resilience, and we have to shift to the ability to be more dynamic and more adaptable and cope better with failures and setbacks that are going to be much more prevalent in the coming years and months. So resilience becomes our next step. Once we've mastered the stress, then let's master resilience. And then once we've mastered resilience, let's augment our potential and our performance. Let's take ourselves to that point of excellence. Don't stop at just managing stress. Don't stop at just becoming more adaptable. Take yourself to what you're capable of. And I think that's where you operate, in that very like high performance, potential augmenting space. And that's really exciting to me.
Brilliant. We're coming to the end of the show. I really thank you for your time, but tell us what changed between Stress Code and Stressproof, and was there any area that you sort of were challenged by, or you felt that you didn't get totally right in the Stress Code? How can you embellish on the fact that Stressproof is something that people should go out and buy?
So I think that as an author, you don't think you got anything right. I think that's the first thing. that you look back and there's things that you automatically see that you could have done better. Yeah. There's more research come out, you could have made it a little bit smoother. So I think it's always a work in progress. I'm already looking at like second edition Stress Code. But what happened during my research process of Stress Code is all about self. It's all about how do I get through this time more successfully and more effectively. And what I kind of uncovered in that process was that so much of the stress that we experience in life comes from our environment, especially the work environment, especially in the corporate world, specifically, even in team sports environment. And the next frontier is to teach leaders, teach those who are responsible for the well-being of others, to control those environments. So basically cut off the stress before it lands or arrives at your team. So you're not managing the after effects. You're not trying to help them through a difficult time. You're actually preventing them from experiencing the unnecessary stresses that exist in many environments, sport, life, work, etc. And there's actually about 12 different stresses, and most of them are modifiable if you have that understanding. And that was the genesis of Stress Code. What do you need to do as a leader to protect your teams in this very difficult time and bring out their greatest potential? Because stress is literally a potential drain. I mean, your productivity is going to go down. If you're burnt out, productivity is down by 40%. If you're depressed, productivity is down. Mild depression, 30%. Severe depression, 50%.
Sure. And
it's not just productivity, it's creativity and innovation and agile ideas and movement and just overall the optimism, enthusiasm that really declines with that. So as a leader, one of the best strategies to enhance the performance of your business or performance of your team is to really ring fence them as much as possible. The stresses that don't have to be there, get rid of them. The stresses that have to be there, teach them how to manage them more successfully and move forward.
Fantastic. And one of the last questions that I ask all my guests, because it's something hopefully I'm going to write on and I'll put the outline hopefully on my book, is about sustained transformation. There's so many people that get sick, they see me, they get a chronic disease, they put things in place, they become habits, but then 9 months later, a year later, they've changed, they've gone back to their old ways, and they just don't sustain their transformation. According to Richard Sutton, what are the 3 possibly biggest areas or pieces of advice you can give, the audience, for people to maintain their sustained transformation?
So I think that we've moved, it's a great question, very tough. And I think we've moved away from just reacting to circumstance. And there was a lot of the narrative today. It was the theme of today's session, is that tactics don't work. So you get sick, you manage your health, you get better, and you carry on how you did. Not going to work. This is a new reality, new time, new circumstances, new set. We have to be strategic. We have to start thinking the long game. So why did you get sick in the first place is more the issue as opposed to, or more the kind of theme as opposed to what do I need to do for the symptoms that I'm experiencing. But I think it fundamentally boils down to one thing. Why? What is your motivation? Why are you doing this in the first place? And if you understand the why, everything else can fall into place. But there's 2 different areas that can motivate us. There's an area of like hope and aspiration and growing socially and all these positive elements. So if we're motivated by hope and aspiration and being best version of ourselves and social acceptance and transforming ourselves in the world, that is not motivation. It's inspiration. And when we're inspired, we can achieve anything. We can change our reality. But sometimes we're motivated by the wrong things. Fear, if I don't do this, then I'm going to. Or punishment, if I don't do this, I'm going to be punished in some way, physically, emotionally, psychologically, financially, for not doing that. And if we're operating on a a concept or model of motivation based on fears and negative elements, it's not sustainable. And that's where you hit the 9 months and it's done. You know, you're not scared anymore of the outcomes of not changing your lifestyle. So my advice is to find your motivation. What is it? What are you aspiring to? So for me, it's to be young for my kids. I've got I've almost got having my third one. It's due fairly in a couple of months, and I've got a 3.5-year-old, and I've got a 2.5-year-old, and I'm almost 50 years old myself. And sure, the motivation to keep healthy is strong. You know, there's not you know, keep well and healthy and young. So I'll get in the pool this morning. You know, it's 7 degrees in the pool. I'll get in because of the effects that it's going to have. I'll exercise even when I don't feel like it. I'll meditate and shut down when I don't feel like it. I'll eat the right foods because I'm motivated by hope and aspiration. And that is my message. I think if you find that hope and aspiration mechanism, that is the power. The one extra point, I get quite excited about this topic, is that there was not a meta-analysis, but a very longitudinal study of Olympic champions, those individuals who held up a gold medal. And what is it that they had that the other athletes didn't have? Was it talent? Was it ability? What was it? And what the researchers found was it didn't relate to talent ability. A lot of the time, they weren't the most talented over a course or span of a career, but at the Olympics, you know, they started when they were 6 years old. They had one opportunity at Olympics or maybe 2 Olympics, and they stood there on the podium holding their gold. What was it? Every single one of them was highly, highly motivated by those positive motivators: hope, aspiration, that social acceptance, positive motivation. They all had this incredible intrinsic strong motivation. So, and there was the support. They knew the value of support, and they knew the value of reframing, and everything I've discussed today. They all had that set, but that was one of the big drivers.
Wow. Motivation from a positive aspect, not negative, of fear, of control, of punishment, of consequence. That a lot of, you know, we drive people's actions. You know, raising kids, you often want to drive them with the negative emotions, but rather to actually reframe it and put it in a positive way, let them believe why they are motivated from a positive point of view. Very, very powerful. Well said and well done. And it reminds me of the etymology of motivation that comes from movere, which means to move with a cause. And to move with a positive cause would probably be even a better sort of description of that. But you can't really give that to someone. They've got to develop that motivation, that positive cause, and move with it. So very, very powerful. From the very young Richard Sutton, what an honor, what a privilege. He's got incredible motivation because, yes, he's got 3 kids. 1 is in utero and 2 kids that he's got that are kicking and screaming around. But what a privilege, what an honor. I want to blow wind in your sails. If there's any way we can help you at Made to Thrive, we want to do that. Where can people connect with you? Where can they hear more of your message? You've got 2 incredible books. We're going to put those in the links when I'm finished. Stressproof, I'd love to have you on the show again. But how can people engage? Such an important, like fundamental part of people's lives. I mean, I just think of my 5-year-old. If the earlier she can understand this and, you know, become part of her life, you know, the shutting down, the control of her system and her environment as best as she can. It's so important. Where can people connect with you, Richard?
So website, suttonhealth.co.za, LinkedIn, Instagram, those are just the different platforms. But just adding, like, it was one small thing, and I'm sorry to stretch.
No, go for it.
That whole motivation, that purpose, that meaning in life. The interesting thing about that is it's driven by the neuropeptides. The stronger the neuropeptides are, oxytocin and neuropeptide Y, so those behaviors are really critical in creating this motivation in the first place. The more we can steer our lives in the direction of positivity and potential. And so if you haven't got that right now, if you haven't got the motivation and the inspiration, you can develop it by these habits of driving the neuropeptides.
Fantastic. And that's the role of health coaches. There's 8 of us online on the Made to Thrive. I always say people need a health coach. I need someone to walk a journey with, someone to help them with all these processes. You know, you might find that yoga works really well. You might find that massage and acupuncture works well. You got to find what sort of floats your boat and what helps shut down this nervous system. And we've got this vagus nerve that is so important to do that and to be able to help you control all these biological processes that are really good, but if they're out of balance, you know, then we've got problems. So thank you so much, Richard Sutton, and look forward to connecting with you in the future, having you on the show again. just blowing wind in your work. I'm proud that you're a South African and you're an international hero. And I get quite emotional when I see South Africans doing the most incredible work, because I believe Africans have a huge role to play in Africa and beyond. You know, there's so much suffering. It reminds me of Naval Ravikant, one of the most incredible people. He's a venture capitalist, but he said suffering is the seed of change. And boy, do we have suffering in this city, in this country, and yet it can be just so instrumental in bringing about change, because we want to bring positive outcomes into people's lives.
Thank you for just the honor of being on your show, the engagement, the gift of, and this opportunity, and likewise, the work that you've been doing over 20 years has been phenomenal. I've only, on the periphery heard like rave reports of anyone who has seen you, their lives have transformed, and most of the positive sentiments are not shared but amplified from my side.